Right, good day. Welcome to the Fundamentals of Risk Management. This is a presentation that was originally developed for the Risk Engineering Society of Engineers Australia, and I now use it for training for people who are thinking of going into risk management. It's an introductory presentation to the fundamental principles of risk management that may help you decide whether this is a career that you pretty much want to progress, or for those of you who just want a refresher around what risk management and what the key concepts are, and pretty much the basics of what you need to understand about risk engineering or risk management in project environments or any other systems context. All right, so without further ado, let's get to the basics. All right, so a good place to probably start is what is the definition of risk and the management thereof. The International Standards Organization, which oversees pretty much all the quality and risk-related standards around the world, defines risk as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. Personally, I've never particularly liked that specific definition, and the reason being is that if you're new to risk management, if you're a risk novice, a new risk learner, or even if English is not your primary language and you're looking for a definition of risk, and you come across this particular definition, I think you're going to struggle to understand what risk is and what the management thereof is. So risk management is probably better to think of it along the lines of a risk is an event, situation, or circumstance which may influence on an entity's ability to achieve its objectives. Risk management, therefore, is the proactive control of such risk, presumably in a manner which promotes positive outcomes. Probably a better way to look at it is if you think of it as an example. If you were to wake up this morning and your first objective of the day or your primary objective is to get to work on time, you may do an informal risk analysis of how to get work on time. You may think, well, if I take the car, there's going to be traffic, there's going to be intersections, there could be roadblocks, there could be accidents. All of these things will delay my ability to get to work on time. Or you may look at it from another point of view. What happens if I take a bus or if I take a train? What are the particular risks and threats and opportunities of arriving on time with each of those scenarios? You may even look at what happens if I take a bicycle. Well, I can't put a backpack, I can't take my laptop, I can't take my gym kit. So a bicycle is not a great way. And when you look at all these various options and the threats to actually getting to work on time, you may decide that the best way to get to work on time in the morning is to actually just catch a train. It's simple, it's point to point. There's less traffic and it tends to run on schedule, so your probability of getting to work on time is much greater if you catch the train. And that's the basic idea behind risk management. It's looking at a number of scenarios, the threats and opportunities involved with those scenarios, and then making an informed decision as to which is the best scenario to actually take to achieve your particular objectives. All right, so a brief history of risk management. There are probably some noticeable developments in the way risk has come about to be in the modern era. It's not new, it's been around for, as you can see, as long as 2,500 years. The earliest recorded risk assessments or risk thinking was Sun Tzu in his Art of War, where he actively encouraged his military generals to do threat assessments before they went to battle so that they could elicit a higher probability of winning the battle if they accounted for every particular outcome or risk-based uncertainty. Over the years, other developments in risk management have been noticeable in history. For example, 800 years ago, risk-based probability theory came to being when the modern world, pretty much around the Mediterranean world, we're looking at risk-based probability theory as a means to win at recreational gaming, in other words, gambling, horses, dice, that kind of thing. About 400 years ago, there's noticeable documentation where risk-based insurance strategies came to be, where merchants who were operating in the ports of predominantly Europe, allowed investors to hedge on particular sailing vessels and invest money into those sailing vessels, and their return would be based on the risk or the probability of that ship coming back with its laden cargo. So risk-based insurance strategies evolved out of probability theory, and you can probably see the first forms of insurance coming about roughly 400 years ago. Then about 60 years ago, after World War II, the world started to globalize. Big companies, big organizations started spreading their operations worldwide, and you saw the likes of globalization coming about. And one of the things that these organizations identified was as their empires got bigger, they took on more risk, more expensive, and so their insurance strategies started going through the roof. So it was noticeable in the 50s and the 60s, organizations, particularly big, large, expansive global organizations, started looking at how they could self-insure. What could they do in-house to ensure the probability of successful outcomes and less risks in their global operation. And it was then when enterprise risk management, which you'll hear a lot about today, started to come big. The idea of self-insurance or self-risk mitigation, where we can take on internal practice to lower the risks within our organization. And from that, we saw things like internal control and auditing coming out, assurance, enterprise risk management, and various forms of financial risk management. All of these were designed to help organizations self-assure or self-risk mitigate so that they weren't as dependent on global insurance strategies, which were incredibly expensive and resource consuming. So today, roughly 2,500 years later, risk management is now an accepted methodology in pretty much all forms of management control and management discipline. You will see risk management in pretty much any sector you go into any industry. You will see people talking about risk management and the need to bring on effective risk control. So as you embark on your careers, even if risk management is not your thing, you're going to be hard pressed to find an industry where risk management is actually not a formal discipline. All right, so what are some of the globally accepted risk methodologies? As I said, it's a formal discipline now, it's expansive, you see it all over the world, and as a result, there are a number of accepted risk management methodologies and standards out there which industry tends to accept, and these are some of the common ones. ISO 31000 is probably the most widely recognized. If you're going to start in a risk management career or profession, this is probably where you want to start. It's the most recognized standard, and most organizations expect people to take on an ISO 31000 view of risk management. The challenge with risk management, with ISO 31000, in my particular view, is it's very foundation level and entry level, and I think most modern organizations have outgrown this and have gone to a level of complexity that doesn't quite get reflected by ISO 31000 as a standard, and I view it as an entry level ticket to play. Every organization will have it, but that's not where risk management is on. It's the earliest form of risk management, and most organizations now are taking their risk taking far beyond the ISO 31000 reach. Another common one is COSO. It also has a pre-2018 version and an updated 2000 version. This is developed by the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations, COSO. It's a global initiative, it's well known. It tends to be more visible in the financial sector and the auditing sector, and for some reason it tends to have more of a financial and fraud flavor to it. Auditors love it, and you'll see most corporate financial risk management functions will have a COSO aspect to it, but it does have an enterprise risk management arm to it, and it does seem to be gaining some traction in the enterprise risk management world, but it was born from financial auditing and financial risk management. PMBOK risk management module, another well-known one. This is quite prevalent in the project management world or program management world, and it provides a set of modules for how to deliver a project successfully. The project risk management module is one particular module of a whole suite of modules that they had to develop. So PMBOK is a global standard for delivering projects successfully. It's US-based, and their view of risk management is incorporated in their suite of standards. And if you move into project risk management, you're probably going to come across PMBOK risk quite frequently. Similar to PMBOK risk is Prince2 risk management. It's the United Kingdom's version of PMBOK. It's also a project delivery standard and has a risk management module in it. For whatever reason, Prince2 seems to be more popular in the technology and public sectors. I'm not sure why, there's no particular reason for that, but in my experience, you tend to see Prince2 more in public sector and technology, whereas PMBOK you tend to see more in infrastructure and civil works. I don't know why, but that's my experience for where they seem to be more popular. Another one is COBIT, Fire Risk Management. This is quite well known in the technology systems world. COBIT stands for Control Objectives for Information Related Technologies, version 5. It's very similar again to Prince2 and PMBOK, but tends to be much more popular in technology systems and ERP type systems, enterprise resource planning. Again, I don't know why, I think that's just where they focus most of the attention. What I do find interesting about COBIT is that they advocate that risk management cannot exist in isolation, and I agree. It needs a good governance structure, a good assurance structure, it needs a good culture, and so on and so on. So COBIT, in my view, is gaining a lot more momentum. It's growing faster than PMBOK or Prince2, maybe because it's not so established and it has some ground to cover, but also it seems to be sending much purer messages around risk management, that risk management is not just about the process, it's also about good governance, good assurance, good culture, and so on and so on. All right, so let's talk about the mechanics of risk management. What is it? What does it involve? So for me, there are 4 basic steps in a risk management process, if you will. If you go to any one of those standards that I've just talked about, you will see that their fundamental methodology can be reduced down to 4 basic common steps. The first step is identify the risk, in other words, predict it or forecast it. The second is quantify the risk, assess it, measure it, prioritize it. How big is it? How much is it going to hurt us by? The third one is control the risk, plan, treat, or mitigate the risk. So once we know its order of magnitude, how big and nasty this risk is, let's put in appropriate treatment actions to reflect the degree of risk that we have to manage. And the fourth step is about reviewing the progress of the risk, monitoring and reporting on the progress until the risk is actually mitigated to an acceptable level or it has actually been closed off. As I said, multiple risk methodologies out there, but almost all of them follow this basic 4-step process, and that is the fundamental basic steps in a risk management process. The basic risk assessment formula, this is one you'll see quite often as well, is how do we determine the degree of risk in play? And most people agree it's a function of 3 things. It's probability of occurrence, in other words, how likely is this risk to happen or to materialize? Its impact, how big or bulky or hurtful is this risk going to be if it does materialize, and the strength of its control environment. So how well are we currently controlling this risk, or how well positioned are we to mitigate this risk if it should materialize? So risk has a relationship formula of probability times impact over control, and that normally determines the risk profile. In other words, the particular degree of risk in play. So if you take those 3 metrics, its probability, its impact, and the strength of its control, and you put them into a relationship formula, that is how you determine the magnitude of the particular risk that you're looking at. Alright, so here's some common risk terminology. There's a lot of it. Most risk management plans and standards all have a terminology guide, and you can get lost in the terminology if you're new to it. So I've just provided some basic terminology just to get you on the right track so you understand what people are talking about when they use specific risk management terminology. The first one I've already discussed, risk profile, and this is normally the nature, demographic, or identity of a particular risk. It's normally expressed as either extreme, high, medium, or low. So it's a high risk, it's an advanced risk, it's a moderate risk. So it's a particular label for determining the magnitude of the risk or the nature of the risk. The way that we can determine before and after type risks comes down to a number of methods. One of the most common ones is inherent and residual risk. Your inherent risk normally refers to an untreated risk or a risk before controls are added. So what is the inherent risk profile? In other words, what is the profile of the risk if no controls are in place or before we put controls in place? The residual risk then looks at what happens to the risk after we put controls in place, and it's normally referred to a particular value of risk after additional treatments or new treatments are put in place. So the inherent risk and residual risk are 2 parent terminologies that are used to determine the before and after of a risk. So inherent is before we put controls in, residual is after we put controls in, and both of them are a particular view of the risk profile. So you may find that an inherent risk profile is up here, and that's unacceptable, but after we put treatments in, we lower it to down here, which is more acceptable, and that's the inherent residual view. The problem with the inherent residual view is that it's taken a lot of criticism around inherent tends to ignore existing controls in place. This has become problematic in certain environments, particular projects, because most project managers and project controls, their full-time job is to mitigate risk. So to do an inherent risk review where you completely ignore controls doesn't really work in a project environment, because people argue that everybody that's on that project is fighting fires and managing risk on a day-to-day basis. So you can't just ignore risk. So in the project world, current state versus future state tends to be more popular. A current state is what is the risk profile right now based on our current understanding, based on our current control conditions. So if we accept everything that is working right now, what is our current control profile? On the back of that, you then get future and target state. And basically here we're looking at if we add additional controls to the current state, what would the future or target state look like? And again, these are 2 versions of profile for trying to determine a before and after time scenario. So the current state would be as it is right now. The future state be if we add additional controls to it, what will the future state look like? And again, it's used quite extensively in systems engineering and project risk management to understand what additional additional controls or treatments we need to design in or include into the system to get from an unacceptable current state to an acceptable future state. All right, two other terminology that's probably worth knowing, particularly in the engineering and infrastructure worlds, OLAP and SAFAR. These came out of safety engineering world and safety assurance world. They're very similar in concept. They have some very specific legal differences, and I'm not going to get into that. All I'm going to say is that both OLAP and SAFAR is about getting a risk to a state that is known as low as reasonably practical, or so far as is reasonably practical. And it's a due diligence requirement in safety engineering. And essentially, the onus is on the designer and the engineer to prove that all risks were understood and they were designed into the system to a point that is as low as is reasonably practical. In other words, we put as much investment and effort into mitigating this risk to get it to a point as low as is reasonably practical. All right, so what are the primary components of a risk management framework? So if we're going to develop a risk management capability or a risk management solution or a risk management framework, what are the basic contributing components of that framework? Everybody has their own view. In my view, there are 6. They are very well documented in the academic literature. They are very well recorded in industry. And if you, just as a starter, these are probably the 6 key contributing components of a risk management framework that you need to consider. The first one is the governance structure, and this is the decision-making body in which all oversight, direction, and decisions are evaluated and made. So it's your leadership structure in its simplest form. The enabling tools for a governance structure is your leadership structure, your assigned roles and accountability, your delegations of authority, and your clearly delineated functional discipline. Now, to me personally, governance is one of the most important things in risk management. I cannot see how any risk-based decision-making can be made if you don't have an adequate structure. So even if you adopt a good risk management process or a good risk management model, if you don't have a governance structure to make decisions around that, risk management is going to go nowhere. The second one is risk appetite. It's probably one of the least documented ones in the literature, but it's critically important in my view. Not every project is the same, not every system is the same, not every organization is the same. What is risky to one may not be risky to another. So how do you determine what risk is and what risk isn't without an adequate risk appetite or risk profile? How do you know what is acceptable risk and what's unacceptable risk if you haven't determined what your risk tolerances or your risk appetite is? So risk appetite is the entity's tolerance for risk taking. What is acceptable risk? What is unacceptable risk? And it's normally represented in a number of ways, either a risk appetite statement, a 5x5 heat map or matrix. For those of you who go to risk engineering, you'll know what that is pretty shortly. Documented risk tolerances, thresholds and limits, and key risk indicators or assurable limits. Essentially, these are the metrics which determine what acceptable risk is and what unacceptable risk is. If you haven't defined that, there's no way to determine what a risk is and which one needs to be controlled. So without some view as to what your risk appetite is, I cannot see how risk management can work in an effective manner. Risk planning, and this is about the need to proactively mitigate risk through robust upfront planning and tactical execution. It may be represented in a series of risk management plans, strategic plans, operational plans, project management plans, engineering plans, whatever it is. But you've got to plan for risk. We've got to understand where risks come from. We've got to have a plan for how we will address those risks, who's accountable for risk, how will we identify risks, where will we identify risk, how frequently will we run risk management workshops, what's the process and standards we're going to use for mitigating our risk, and basically what is the plan? How do we attempt to control risk in our particular organization without a plan? So risk planning is a key part of risk management, and you'll regularly hear about the need to develop risk plans in whatever world you go into. The fourth component is risk control systems, and this is about the need to effectively manage and control those kind of systems to deliver the required outcomes, right? Whilst proactively controlling against the associated risk. So normally your risk systems in its simplest form is your risk reporting system. The identify, evaluate, control, and report step-by-step process. That's a risk management system. In the project world, it may be your control systems, your performance management system. In your organizational worlds, it may be your strategy and business planning systems. The point is that if you don't have adequate systems for controlling risk, then risk is going to go nowhere, because how do you know what to do with the risk once you've identified it? So we've identified this is a risk, but what do we actually now do with it? How do we evaluate it? How do we report it? How do we escalate it? Those are your risk management systems. So systems are critical to good risk management, and I cannot see how a risk management capability can work if you haven't defined what your system is for processing the risk and escalating and getting it actually mitigated. Risk-based assurance, this is quite big in engineering and the project management world. The need to have an independent body to test and validate critical data, critical controls, and that kind of thing. So it's not enough to just identify risks and develop risk registers and develop risk information. It also has to be regularly tested and validated, preferably by an independent body, so that you can get a neutral opinion on whether you're on the right track or not. So risk-based assurance is big in organizational risk management. It's big in project risk management. You will often hear about project assurance or organizational assurance or internal control. All of this is about getting an independent view to test and validate key risk data so that we don't fall trap to assumptions or unnecessary bias. The whole point of assurance is to bring in a neutral view as to what your risks are and the best way to mitigate it, so that we don't fall trap to siloed thinking or groupthink or biased views. All right? Risk culture, probably the most important one. Risk is never ever going to work unless you get an adequate and effective risk culture in place, and preferably a culture of high accountability and high awareness for risk. For those of you who go into the safety world, you will see risk culture everywhere. You'll see the banners, you'll see the high visibility vests, you'll see the safety wear, you'll see the safety shares. All of these is about driving an appropriate risk culture for developing safety risk. Unfortunately, risk culture has been lost a little bit in organizational risk management, project risk management, and other forms of risk management. I'm not sure why. Safety is probably the best risk management discipline for demonstrating the value of risk culture. But once you understand the power of risk culture, you need to transfer it to all forms of risk management, in my opinion. And the way that you enable risk culture can be through things like accountability and incentives, performance metrics and remuneration, and risk awareness programs and marketing and high visibility initiatives. Without an adequate culture, people are just going to find shortcuts or ways to bypass the risk management efforts you want to place. So I cannot stress strongly enough how important getting a desirable risk culture in place is to enabling effective risk management. All right, so what are common types of risk management? Where can I see risk management in industry? So there are a number of risk management disciplines you're almost certainly going to come across. The first one is enterprise risk management. And this is probably about the risk management in the corporate world or the organizational body. The typical things that you will see under the ERM banner or enterprise risk management banner will be corporate governance, strategic risk management, financial risk management, operational risk management, auditing and corporate assurance, and insurance. All of those fall under the enterprise risk management banner, and whatever organization you work for, whether it's an engineering firm or any other, will have an enterprise risk management function. All right? Underneath that, you'll probably come across project risk management. For those of you who work in the project risk world or project delivery world, project risk management is a specific discipline of risk management, and it includes project governance, project assurance, cost risk management, schedule risk management, contingency risk management, scope risk management, change control, and benefits management. All of these contribute to the project risk management world, and for those of you who go to risk engineering or project risk management, you're almost certainly going to come across these particular aspects of risk management. Risk engineering, most of you will probably get into this in one way or another. This includes safety assurance, safety and design, process safety, systems assurance, faults analysis, reliability engineering, hazardous operation studies, and probabilistic risk determination. And as in all cases, this is about actually designing risk management into the engineering processes, quality and safety. Probably the most common form of engineering risk management is safety and design and process risk engineering. For those of you who go to the engineering world, I cannot see how you won't come across those on an almost day-to-day basis. All right, so what's the future of risk management? Now that we've talked a little about what risk management is and how it works right now, what is the future of it, right? So in order to understand what the future of risk management is, you probably need to understand what some of the current criticisms of conventional risk management are. Probably the three most common one is that existing conventional risk management standards assume that all material risks are in fact foreseeable, all right? They tend to ignore the existence of unpredictable risks such as black swans, rogue waves, unknown and unknown. You would have seen earlier I talked about the 4 basic steps in a risk management process, and you would have seen the methodologies that are industry accepted at the moment. In all of them, the first step in risk management is identify the risk. Now, in order to identify the risk and then move on to the second step, which is measure the risk, that assumes that the risk is actually foreseeable or it's known. But we are now starting to work in highly complex environments where there's more uncertainty than certainty. So there are more risks we cannot foresee than we can foresee. So we're now getting to a world where we're starting to accept that conventional risk management is too focused on known risks and not focused enough on unknown risks. So that's one of the big criticisms right now. The second criticism is there's too much emphasis on risk officers having to identify and measure the risk, okay? There's not enough emphasis on risk officers having to mature the internal controls and improving the internal resilience of the system or the host organization. So as I said, there are those 4 steps in the process: identify and measure the risk. The concern in almost all risk management that you see is that all the risk management efforts and capabilities are geared around trying to improve the way we identify and measure risks. There's not enough risk literature or risk standards or methodologies focusing on the need to improve your internal controls or the need to improve the internal resilience of your system. So identifying and measuring risk, that's one type of risk management. But improving internal controls is another one. If you strengthen your maturity of your controls, if you get better controls, then you're less dependent on having to proactively identify risk. Secondly, if you can build an internal resilience to risk, then you don't have to worry about individual risk scenarios, because whichever one comes along, the resilience of your organizations will deal with that risk as they come along. So one of the criticisms out there is we're too focused on identifying and measuring specific individual risk scenarios than actually maturing the internal controls and improving the resilience of your internal system. The third criticism that's out there is that most risk management methodologies tend to promote a one-size-fits-all approach to risk management in a world that is crying out for scalable, fit-for-purpose management solutions. This is probably my biggest criticism of conventional risk methods, for example, ISO 31000 or PMI risk or Prince 2 risk, whatever. They tend to aggregate the view that doesn't matter how big your project is or how big your organization is or how complex or how dynamic or how contextually unique your environment is. Our particular approach to risk management is good enough. Just bring that on board, put that in there, and you're set to go as far as risk management is concerned. That is so not true, all right? Every organization environment is completely different. We need scalable, fit-for-purpose solutions for risk management. What works in one environment is not guaranteed to work in another, and we need to start accepting that. So now that we understand some of the criticisms of conventional industry-accepted risk management, that puts us in a position to understand what the future of risk management might look like. The 2 areas that offer, in my personal opinion, the most promise as to the future of risk management is number 1, the complexity sciences. And this includes things like system theory, network theory, chaos theory, and the like. And this is where my PhD is going. And the proponents of the complexity science argue that our working world is not getting any simpler. It's only getting more and more complex. Therefore, we need to start paying attention to the academically valid and scientifically valid teachings of the complexity sciences if we want to understand how to improve risk management in highly complex environments. I believe there's a lot of merit to it. There's a lot of learnings coming out of the complexity sciences, which I believe in future will be incorporated to risk management. And many of you here will be working in the risk management in 10, 20 years' time, and you will start seeing complexity sciences overtaking conventional risk management to become the new view, the new generation view of what risk management should be in a highly complex system. The second area which I believe offers a lot of promise is that of resilience. Resilience is the ability to respond to rapid changes in a positive manner, all right? The proponents for resilience argue that our working world is not getting any more certain, only more and more dynamic, irrational, volatile, and disruptive. Therefore, the ability to identify individual risk scenarios all the time, on time, and in time is being left behind. So a lot of people are starting to say that the future of risk management is to build an internal resilience to whatever this way comes. So instead of trying to identify individual scenarios and developing a risk register of a whole bunch of scenarios, rather improve your internal controls, rather get rid of internal vulnerability, and rather build a systemic view of risk that allows your organization to become highly resilient to all the risk and disruption that's out there. If you can do that, you are positioned for the new generation and for the future. And there's a lot of stuff coming out of the risk and resilience world that I think you will, as the future of risk management, will come to know. So be aware that the 2 future areas that you're probably going to come to know in your risk management careers are the complexity science and the resilience sciences. Both of them are linked in some extent, so you're probably going to see a lot more around this in the future.